right, what is up, everyone? Welcome back here to another episode of the Lure Lab, a part of the Serious Angler Network. As always, I am your host, and today we have a really fun episode. We are talking frogs, frog fishing, in and out, weed mats, laydowns, uptight to cover, and our guest is going to be Hunter Shryock. I hope I said that right. I'm terrible with pronunciating names, but I hope you tuned in to last week's show where we had Taylor Watkins on and we broke down all the ins and outs about spinnerbait fishing and how changing blades out can affect the performance of a spinnerbait and how to tune them to get them back running right. That was a really awesome episode, but let's dive in here, get Hunter on and talk some frog fishing. What's going on, man? How you doing?
What's happening? Good. How are you doing?
Ready to get my boat.
You did announce my name right. That was perfect. I was surprised because most people don't. Most people add the R after the Y, so you got it right. You was talking about that spinnerbait episode. I need to listen to that.
Yeah, it was
one thing I'm not very tuned up on.
It's funny. It's something that I feel like we've all put away in our back pocket, and then we're like, "Dang it, when should I throw a spinnerbait?" And it just catches them. It's fun. I love it.
Oh, it's such a fun bite. Like I have so many spinnerbaits, and then Berkeley just came out with theirs, and I'm like one of those people, like I'll go and throw it because you know the conditions to throw it in, but if I don't get a bite, like, okay, the spinnerbait's junk. I don't know how to make it better. I don't know why it's good or why it's bad. Obviously, like the smaller wire, stuff like that. But dude, those spinnerbaits that they came out with from Berkeley are pretty legit. With that, yes. So that longer hook, have you caught some on it?
I have not. I'm actually like a diehard War Eagle fan, and there's only one reason why. It's the hammered blades. I only buy the hammered blade ones that have gold and silver blades on them because the way they refract light, and I only throw them in the fall.
I gotcha.
That's my crux. Like I only
that's your go-to.
Yeah.
But you got confidence in it. That's all that matters. So it's going to work.
Yeah, won a couple tournaments doing it, but that's about the only time I ever throw it. So I'm like, I need to throw it more.
Yeah. So I heard that.
We're talking frogs today, which is another really fun technique, right? So let's dive right in. I don't know what's better, a largemouth eating a frog through a mat, or like a 6-pound smallmouth ripping the rod out of your hand when it crushes a spinnerbait.
Right. Just cutting your line, it feels like.
Like
so much.
Reeling it, and you get like 5 feet of slack. You're like, oh no.
You reel in, he's all the way over there.
Smallmouth. I miss them and I love them and I hate them all at the same time. So, all right. So let's dive in. Favorite frogs. Are you a walking frog or a popping frog fan, or a mixture of both?
Yeah, I'm definitely a walking frog fan more than the popping frog. And to be honest with you, I really do feel like the popping frog does generate bigger bites. There's just something about the way that thing pops that does generate larger than average size fish on a frog just day in and day out. The problem with the popping frog, and I think this is across the board for everyone, is your hookup ratio. Something to do with the way that cup is on the mouth of that frog, going back to the hook points. I don't know what it is, but I've had some bad experiences with a popping frog, specifically like the Spro. I mean, everyone has a Spro popping frog tied on. It's a big fish, bait, and people throw it just normally, whatever, but you do tend to lose them more than the typical walking frog. So that's why I kind of, being a tournament angler, I lean towards that, just normal walking body frog.
This is my favorite frog. I believe this is the Jackal IOB. The hookup ratio on this thing is incredible. It's super soft. The one thing that I actually do enjoy about it, and it might be hard to see, but right here you can see how there's like a little notch in the hook they put in there, and it causes the hook points to raise.
Yeah.
So the hookup is incredible on it. They just tear after like 2 fish every time.
Yeah, and that's one thing I haven't experimented with. Throwing as many frogs as what I do, I haven't gotten into like the JDM jackal frogs, like the Japan style. Like what was that one again? The
Jackal IOB.
jackal one. I know there's like a depths one. There's all kinds of them. They're super high priced too. And I
Yeah, I
think,
think this is $11.99 or $12.99, like just ridiculous.
yeah,
So it's not terrible, but it's
it's not.
bad.
No, I'm pretty much either a Spro or a Booyah. Like that's just kind of like you were talking about with your spinner baits, like that what you had confidence in, and I just, you know, I that's what I had the most confidence in. The bodies are soft, they're collapsible, the hookup ratio, and I know what to expect. You know, when I'm using them, and pretty consistent across the board. Heck, I even run the stock hooks in them, and that's something that I experimented a lot with, trying to replace and put in different hooks, and ultimately found that just going back to the stock hooks, you do have to check and make sure because they do change them sometimes. Even the same manufacturer will put in like a different brand of hook, so you just take it out of the package and just make sure it's the hook that you want, and then go from there.
Jeez, that's something I never even like knew or thought about because I'm just like, oh, for a $10 frog, it's like, yeah, I can understand changing the hooks on a jerkbait, but on a frog, I've never really experimented with that. And now I'm like, crap, now I want to go find my frog box and like, are they different?
Yeah, yeah, you'll probably notice you'll pull out the same type of frog, and if you got five of them, you might have one or two that are different from the rest of them.
And it's just
So just
because
year
of
to
like
year, and
manufactured date basically and what they have in stock.
could have, yeah. Yeah, some will be a big round hook, and others will be like a smaller gap, flatter, long shanked point to it. So yeah, it's kind of weird, but
It's very interesting. Like
yeah, just pay
light bulbs
attention.
are going off. Ooh, that makes
Yeah,
me mad. Like inside, that makes me really mad. But favorite colors of frogs, like everyone's got their favorites. Mine's like a
right.
bluegill or a black. So what are your favorite colors for
I
fishing frogs?
mean, my favorite. I mean, if I'm going to put on a frog, a white one's always going to be the first one. And that sounds, I mean, it's either like white or black for most people, right? And so most of the time, I'm like that shad imitator type of deal. But it's white, black, or like a yellow. That's it. And I know a lot of people will get really crazy with the colors and what they think, but to me, a bass looking up and you think of sunlight looking back at them, they're not probably getting that good of a look at it as what we think they are. Now, certain situations, clear water, you know what I mean? I can see where something will make a difference, but overall, like they're biting that thing because the conditions are right. They're in a good mood, and you're throwing it in the right place. Like that's you're agitating them more so than they're like, oh well, that's not that perch that I was chasing earlier. I'm not going to eat it. Like I don't think they get like that.
Do you ever choose the color of your frog based on like light conditions? So if it's sunny or overcast or windy?
Yeah, my biggest thing is going back to the white, black, or yellow, what am I fishing around? Is it the springtime? Is it a shad spawn? Or are the fish spawning? Is it summertime brim beds or is it the fall? Springtime, if they're on beds, I kind of lean more towards that black and yellow bodied frog or a green or whatever it is. Green, yellow. I don't know what that looks like. That kind of looks like green, but it's yellow to me. Anyhow, so something that imitates a brim, right? If they're on beds. And then obviously the shad spawn, you're going to throw white. Awesome bait to be able to have around the shad spawn. And then back in the fall, they're chasing bait. And it's going to be white again. But it's getting back to your question as far as like the light conditions. If I was throwing a white frog and now all of a sudden it's super, super cloudy out, I will maybe color the bottom of it, like maybe put some brown Sharpie marker to kind of, it's still like a translucent. It makes it more of you get what I'm saying. It's not a solid black. It still
Yeah.
has some white to it, but something that maybe they can see a little bit more. And I haven't done that a whole lot because typically they still eat it regardless. So
On that point of coloring the belly black. This one guy I fished with, I don't know, like 7, 8, 9 years ago. I don't remember the exact timeline. He literally had a white Spro. It's the one with like I forgot what it's like tropical something, the color, and it has like orange in it. He literally
Oh yeah.
painted the bottom of it like pitch black. And I was like, dude, why don't you just throw a black frog? Like, if you want it that
Yeah.
black, like it's
Yeah.
coming
Yeah.
through a
Yeah.
mat, you can hardly see it. I'm like, why waste the frog and just buy a black one?
And I do see the ones that are like black on the bottom and they have the white on the top.
Yeah.
And so that's more for us to be able to see it. You know,
Right.
as anglers, we can see it better. So that makes sense. I mean, I've been in the boat with Jacob Wheeler, and we were frogging, and here on the Tennessee River, and side by side, and he went through all kinds of frogs, and I went through all kinds of frog colors, and we both had the same amount of bites. Basically, he even threw a pink frog, and
Got bites.
continued to get this, you know what I mean? Like every 10, 15 minutes, if we're around them, you get a bite. And so me seeing that, and yes, it was around mats, but they could still, it was kind of like opening holes and stuff. So like to me, it was like it doesn't matter that much, you know, more or less the silhouette, you know,
Yeah.
of them being able to see it.
That is very interesting. So basically, what you're saying is you can buy whatever color frog you want, and if you throw it in the right time in the right place, you're probably going to get bit on it.
The biggest thing is having confidence in what you're throwing.
Yeah.
I want to say, I'm going to go ahead and go down this rabbit hole with frog fishing. And it's like my setup, all my stuff's super basic. It's the conditions, trumps, everything about the frog. Now there's things to do to modify, obviously, to make, you know, basically your hookup ratio. And that's obviously the other biggest thing with a frog is your hookup ratio. But the weather, the conditions trumps everything. And it's taken me a long time to realize that, being able to see the day that the frog is going to work and see the day that the frog's not going to work. And being a tournament angler, multi-day events, I may get on a frog bite in practice, right? And no matter what time of the year, spring through fall, I have a frog tied on in my boat. But you get on that frog bite, but then there's weather coming in. And I mean, in a week's time, you're always going to have fronts coming in and out, in and out.
Especially on the Elite Series.
Especially on the Elite Series. It's like if there's not a flash flood, there's something going on.
Yeah.
So we're always faced with those conditions, and you know, how do you adjust? How do you make that work throughout the week? And the biggest thing that I've learned is they do not like it. Not saying they won't eat it, but they do not like it with a high pressure system. So after a front rolls through and you get a north wind, I'm telling you, I've lost a lot of money because I've tried to push that issue, right?
Yeah.
And the fish are still there, but you're asking them to do a lot to come up and attack this bait when they're not feeling up to it. Mm-hmm. And so prefrontal, I mean, when it, you know, you got a front coming in, low pressure, and you got the clouds, maybe you got a little bit of wind and you're throwing it in protected areas, hang on, you're going to get bites. You know what I mean? Like and that's a lot of ways with a lot of things. But with that frog, you're asking a lot out of those fish commitment wise to come up, eat that bait, and hold on to it long enough for you to set the hook and catch it. And so what happens with that north wind, and it's usually the first day of the north wind, you can be all right. Maybe. You know what I mean? Like you'll almost feel it throughout the day. Are you still there?
Yep. Like you almost feel the conditions like running away from you on that frog bite is what you're saying.
Yes. Right? And like that first day of the north wind, throughout that day, at some point, if you're throwing it all day, you will probably see that transpire. But by the second day, it really like kicks them in the head. And the deal is adjusting how to catch those fish, you know, that you were once targeting with a frog. Can you still catch them on something else, or do you have to abandon them? And like for me, a swim jig is always a good go-to in that situation, or a fluke, a weightless stick bait like a General, something like that, you don't feel as good about it, right? But
Never.
that's a way that's a way to, combat that. Now, again, going back to having the weather on your side, the frog bite's unbelievable. You lock it in your hands and go for it. That's what I've done so many times, and it has worked out. And those times that it hasn't has been due to weather. Another big thing is lightning. If you have lightning the day or night before a tournament, for whatever reason, shallow fish, it just freaks them out. And so what you'll do is you'll get a lot of short strikes, and being able to read that early enough to be able to be like, okay, I need to pull the plug on this and try something else, because they'll keep your hopes up, and you might catch one or two or three, but it's just not the same as what it possibly was before. Again, this is just me being burned time and time again by it.
Frogfish. They're kind of like spinnerbait fish, right? Like they
Yeah.
show up when you least expect it. Well, you hope they show up when you want to expect it, but then they just disappear when you least
But
expect
it's a
it.
lot like that. It's a lot like a spinnerbait, because a spinnerbait takes good conditions to throw it, right? And when
Yeah.
it's there, you just do it. And then you want to go out and do it again the next day, and you don't have those conditions. And
It,
so,
I feel like you could say that for a lot of things in bass fishing, though. Like
yep,
a lot of different techniques are that way. The only thing that we know that always catches fish is a wacky Senko and a drop shot.
yep,
Like, and
yep,
maybe a shaky head, maybe.
yeah, 100%. Because I mean, at least you can force feed them with that stuff.
Right. Yeah.
You talk about swim baits or glide baits and stuff, conditions, right? You got to have the right conditions, and then you blast them one time, but it was because everything was right for it. A frog isn't that extreme, because given the time of the year, they're going to be on that top water hard anyhow.
Mhm.
But again, just be leery or be conscious of the weather and the situations that you're dealing with, and it can produce in a big way for you, or hurt your feelings.
Yeah, it always tends to hurt my feelings, and then I'll go back the next day and they'll eat it, and I'm like,
There,
"Dang it."
yeah. Yeah, because you
But
get a 4 or 5 day window, they're gonna bite it for like 3 days at least, and 2 days they're
eventually.
not gonna be on it.
Oh, yeah, so let's dive into your setups. You said that you have basically your frog fishing is very basic, right? So kinda dive
Yep.
into your setups, but, like, do you have 2 different setups for open water and weed mats versus, like, when you're fishing tight to structure, like laydowns and docks? So kind of dive into that, and rod and reel, and maybe the
Yeah.
line size of the braid that you use.
Yep. And I do have a YouTube video on my mat fishing frog setup. So I don't know if that's something you guys could point them to as well, just to give them some more information on it. But pretty much, if I am doing an open bodied frog, I'm going to take this frog right here. And I'm not a big, like, I don't leave the legs long. I know guys do. I don't think there's a right or wrong way. But I take a pair of scissors on about an inch. I'm going to cut it this way, and I'm going to do it a little bit shorter, or a little bit longer, or a little bit shorter on the opposite leg. And and I'm going to clip it from this angle. So now you have these tapered, and what that's going to do is allow that frog to walk better. And I think a lot of people already know that, but that's what I do. So the legs are pretty short, and I think what that does is gives me a little bit better hookup ratio, because there's less legs for that fish to come up, and because you got to think they're trying to suck this frog in, and now you got legs that are super long. It's just more stuff in the way that could keep them from eating it. So, and then that's it. Like, I'm gonna make sure that the hooks are good. Probably just turn them up a little bit with a set of pliers, and like, I want to be able to brush my fingers across the top of it and feel, almost get a hook point in your finger when you're brushing the top of it. If I'm fishing like a lot of like laydowns or wood, I'm going to probably not do that as much, just because you are going to get snagged up more. But if I'm fishing like just grass and stuff, I want to get those hook points as high as I can, get away with them. And that's pretty much it. I'll add a dab of super glue on the eye, and this will shorten the life of your frog. But what I've noticed, maybe you've seen this too, where you catch one and it pulls the body down the shank of the hook. And what that did, and you probably lost the fish because then the whole frog balled up on the points of your hook. So you didn't get a hook in them. You had the bite, you had the fish on. But if you throw the frog long enough, more likely, or if you pick up a fish, it's going to pass. Yeah. So I super glue it. You can keep super gluing it until it falls apart. I've had these things when they really start getting good is when the teeth marks, and they're all, you know how it is when they're super soft, they're all worn out, the color's halfway gone. Those are your best frogs. But once you get to that point, put that frog in the box and get a new one out. Start practicing with it. Because I got a couple of those.
It's only gonna last like 5 to 10 more fish once they're really worn down, I feel like. Because
I know, but dude, all they have to do is breathe on it and they're gonna get hooked.
Yeah, the
best. But that's why I like the Spros and a Booyah. This is a Booyah just because it's super collapsible, super soft. It's basic. It's a cheap frog, nothing to it. So that's open body frog. And now for like if I'm fishing mats and without grass, I'm actually going to cut both of these legs completely off. Because at this point, it doesn't even matter. Like if there's no holes, I mean, you're going to have holes, but like I'm primarily getting my bites out of the cheese. I'm going to take and cut these off, and I'm going to take super glue just to make sure that, water's not going to be coming in, and I'm going to fill those up. Then depending on how thick the mats are, I'm going to add weight to it. And I'm not like a lot of weight. All I want is the frog to be able to penetrate that grass mat. And so that's a big deal because if it's more times than not, you're fishing across stuff that they can come up through, but you still need it to make an imprint so those fish know, they feel that presence up above them. And so I like to add like a BB. You can add a tungsten weight, but it's still the tungsten weights that I've ever found, are still fairly large. And I don't want anything to impede, the collapsibility of that, if that's even a word, collapsibility. I don't want nothing to stop that from collapsing. So if you can get away with as little as possible, that's the goal. One thing I do like to do is take like a glass bead or a little worm glass rattle, put that in there. You can crush it. So now you don't have like just one solid glass rattle. It's crushed and you have like all kinds of broken glass in there. Sounds kind of crazy, but it's not coming out of it. Yeah, it's a whole different sound. So and I rotate between either that or using these little jingle bells. And this is funny. These little tiny jingle bells, and you can look on Amazon, and they're like brass jingle bells, like ornaments making or something, but they're tiny, like they're little cute jingle bells. And dude, they have a sound like we don't have in fishing, this little ping, ping, ping. So
it just makes the bass go crazy.
Like, I don't know. I mean, I've seen that before. I think I've seen it on a wired to fish deal. And I'm like, I got to try that. So I tried it, and sure enough, and I think you can get even smaller ones. So get on Amazon, check out some small jingle bells or something to that effect, and you can throw one of those in there. Again, just don't fill your frog up too much. You don't want it. You also don't want it like sinking all the way through the mat. Yeah. You just want it just enough to where those fish know that something's up above it. So between that, basically bending up the hooks, super glue the front. So now all you have is like this little nub of a of a frog that's left, but that's your ratting frog, and the reason why I cut the legs off, become the grass, where they're pulling that grass down, where you've seen them come up through that grass. They can be pretty vicious, and they don't have very good aim.
No, so horrible.
The more legs, the more surface area you have, the more likely that they're going to come up and miss it, but it kicks your frog away. And then you're like, you've seen them, miss the whole thing, and now your frog bounced and he can't find it. And the fish is literally sitting there looking, and you're 2 feet away, and you don't get him to come back. And then you have to make another 30-yard cast to try to get it right on his head again. And you know how that is. It's not easy to do.
No.
So trim the legs off. They don't see them. And smaller profile will get you bit.
I like it. Now, you won't throw that same frog around like laydowns and docks, will you?
No, no. I specifically have like 3 rat frogs, one of each color in my frog box, unless I'm going to someplace like the Mississippi River. I just have those same 3 frogs in my box that are specifically just for grass mats. Everything else is open water frogs.
Perfect. I enjoy it. So, what is the rod and reel in like line size of your braid that you use?
Yep. So I use a 7.3 medium or 7.3 heavy Veritas PLX tournament series rod. That's Abu Garcia. I used to use the Fantasista Premier, and they discontinued it. Hurt my feelings, and it
That's my
took me a
favorite
little bit of
Abu
time.
rod of all time.
I know it hurt my feelings because I literally have 2 7.3 heavies that I don't know how many frogfish I've caught on. Since 2017, I've had those 2 rods. And so making that switch, I'm glad I found that rod in their lineup. And so it's a lot like it and almost lighter. So, and that's a big deal with throwing a frog. If you're throwing it just for a little bit, it's, it's okay to have a heavier rod. But if you can get that lighter rod with a heavy action, softer tip, that's a big deal. Not going to tire you out as much. It's going to be more enjoyable, and you're going to be able to work your frog better. For the reel, I usually run the Xenon X, and it's an 8:3 to 1. I like a faster gear ratio. It's got a good drag system on it. You don't have to be super crazy, like He-Man stuff with your frog as far as the drag and stuff like that. You just don't want one that's going to strip out like an aluminum gear over a brass gear. So line, I use 50-pound X5 Berkeley braid, and sometimes I'll go up to 65. That's just depending on like the cover and everything else. But 9 times out of 10, I'm going to 50-pound X5 braid, and I'm filling the entire spool up with X5. Like I know a lot of guys will put like a backing, but the way the reel is, I can tie it to the spool. And the reason is, how grass fishing is. I mean, there's mats that you can't even hardly get close enough to make that long of a cast. So I don't know how far I cast it, but I've gotten pretty good at casting this thing a super long ways accurately. And it's a big deal.
And I'd say the last thing you want too is a knot in your reel or tape down catching on the braid as it's coming out, because that
Right.
could hinder you as well on that super long
Yeah.
cast.
I've done it so many times to where I'll cast and literally, because you're using 50-pound braid, so the diameter is large. So I don't know exactly how many yards you're getting on it, but it's not the same as putting, 20 or 30-pound braid on there, or, 15-pound fluorocarbon, whatever. So being able to cast this thing, it's easy, but I'll cast the dang near the spool off, and I'll look down and I'll literally have like, a roll up or 2 of line on the spool. But I feel like you get more bites when you can make those casts because you don't have that pressure of the boat right there. And how many times have we been fishing mats and, oh shoot, one just came up and it's all the way over there and it's just almost out of reach? Well, you got to try, because if you don't get to it in time, you're not going to get that bite.
Nope.
And so you got to sling it. So that's really, really important to be able to, utilize that X5 braid, 50 pounds, trying to get a long cast out of it.
Now, I've heard a lot of people will go to like a 7.6 or a 7.10 like frog rod for open water and weed mat fishing, but do you feel like you're more efficient with like that 7.3? Like, you're talking about that bass blowing up 30, 40 yards away, right? You can turn around and just snap that 7.3 and be more accurate with it probably than a long rod.
Yeah, for me, yes. That's like I said before, making that 30 or 40-yard cast to a blow up hole that's this big. I mean, you got to be, and then you got a little crosswind, so now it's like you have to be, oh gosh, I don't know how many times I've been in a tournament and you're like, there, the fish just blew up, you missed it, and now you have to deliver that next cast. Like, it's so important to get that bait back in there, quickly. And you got to do it, quick and accurate. And so it's kind of like bed fishing in a way, because there's nothing, frog fishing, even though it looks kind of fast, it isn't very fast. And especially if you're mat fishing, that takes a long time to fish and to sit there, and you think, oh, I made a cast. Well, now it's going to take you a minute to get it back to the boat. So very, very tedious process.
So I have I have two questions for you, and you just prompted one of them. So you're practicing for an event, right? And you're covering this vast weed mat area. When you're pre-practicing, like looking at your maps and maybe even studying on Google Earth, how do you predetermine where you think you're going to be able to get a fish to bite a frog based on like the topography, the contour lines on the bottom of the lake, and then history of seeing it if you've never been to the lake?
There's certain things being able, if we're talking just about grass mats, being able to look at a grass mat, and obviously our maps are so good, we can see the points and the humps and stuff. And that's, any type of irregularity is going to hold fish probably. But being able to look at a grass mat and judge what's the differences amongst it. And that's probably the biggest thing, is my eyes are so trained anymore, to be able to see, okay, the whole mat looks this color green, but now there's a different color. There's maybe a lighter green or a darker green. I'm going to kind of spend a little more time on that. Or there's the thickest part, or the part that looks like it's been there the longest compared to the rest. I'm going to spend my time on that. Just picking up little things. And then also, when you get that first bite, where did that bite come from in that grass mat? Did it come from this color, that color, open? Was it super tight? Those are all the things that, really key you in. And even getting to that point, I like mat fishing because you can't always look at your map and say they're going to be right here, because you can find a sneaky group of fish because you have to fish for them to find them. And so what I like to do, and it's probably not the correct way, but we don't have a lot of time in practice, and you're trying to cover all these areas. Dude, I will sling that thing and work it like I'm almost like a speed toad, like just until you get a bite. Because there might be a mile, if you're fishing a grass lake, there's a mile of dead mat that nothing lives under. But then all of a sudden you get a bite. You slow down a little bit, you get another bite. Like, okay, I know there's fish here. Now, come time for the tournament, I'll come back and soak my frog on that area and kind of find out how much is actually there. But to find those bites, once you get around them, you're around them, especially when you get up north. And the other big key is don't have your AirPods in, be listening to those mats. Because when you hear those brim, it sounds like Rice Krispies. Everybody's heard it, but it's true. You'll go and you won't hear any. And more than likely, you don't get a bite, or it's a random one or whatever, but the majority of like the schools and groups of fish will be around those Rice Krispies, all those brim just sucking and popping at the surface. And, that's another key thing to listen to throughout the day, because you'll have windows where there's nothing and those brim aren't eating, and you're in a good area. Maybe it's in the tournament, and then all of a sudden life starts to happen. And typically it's when that sun gets up, 10, 11, 12 o'clock, everything starts to come to life. The grass starts to heat up. Those fish start popping, and all of a sudden, koosh, you hear one.
Yeah,
koosh, you hear another one.
It's like heaven on earth as you pull into a weed mat, and also you hear,
Yep.
you're like,
And so
They're
Yes.
ready to be cracked.
So as much as we want to have the best frog, it's like at the end of the day, the conditions and where you're throwing it trumps what we're doing. But again, we got to get those fish in the boat. So having that stuff that I mentioned, super basic, but it's put a lot of fish in the boat for me. And I know you've thrown a frog long enough to know that, it's kind of the same deal. You take what you get, and basically you got to go find them and do these simple modifications to your frog to help that landing percentage go up, but ultimately just being in tune with what's going on, what nature's given you, and that's frog fishing to a T.
Love it. Thank you so much. So, one last question for you, and then I'll let you get out of here. But this last question is customized by Do Up Molds, and you know, the question is, if you have one piece of advice or one last modification that you would give anyone who picks up a frog for the very first time, what would it be?
Man, very first time. um if you're picking it up for the very first time, I would say when that frog eats it, this is great advice for anyone, because it's taken me a while to learn this too. Is pay attention to your frog. Don't be waiting to hear this big splash that something ate it. So when you're working it, and if you're a beginner, you'll learn having that little bit of slack. You pop your reel at the same time. You get this frog to basically walk like this. But we tend to get in this boredom trance and looking around at what we're going to do next. And the biggest fish I've ever caught on the frog, you would have never known they ate it. If I wasn't watching, they just 8-pounder, set the hook, and you're like, oh my gosh. So I've missed a lot of fish doing that as well, where I would be looking because I'm in a tournament and you're just geared up. You're 3 casts ahead of where you're at, and one ate it, and I'm still doing this, and I go and try to set the hook, and then you come back and your frog's all filled up with water. It's a telltale sign that a fish had pulled it down, held it, and let go of it. So keep your eye on the frog like a ninja the whole time. It's very, very hard to be like, that persistent. And when they do eat it, like I like to make sure they eat the frog. I know guys that are like super quick, and then I've seen people that like wait a long time as well. I'm not a big waiter. Like I just want to know that they have the frog and that they didn't miss it. And by the time I process that and set the hook, it's about just enough time, because they do not like to swim with these, compared to like a buzzing speed toad from Berkeley. That's a solid bodied frog. You can be reeling that and they eat it, and you can almost click the bail and they hold on to it. And I think it has something to do with the density of the body or whatever, but they do not like to hold on to these very often. And so you got a very small window to be able to know that they have it, set the hook, and be good to go. So that was a long piece of advice, but
Yeah.
for sure
It's a great 2-minute piece of advice, and I thank you so much for coming on. We will down below, before I let you go here, I will make sure that we put the tag in the video back to where you mentioned about your YouTube episode with the frog fishing open water side. We'll make sure that it's in there, but it will also be down in the description for everyone so they can click on it and go
Perfect.
over it whenever they please to view it. So thank you
Cool.
for taking the time, Hunter. Good luck at the next tournament, which is Lake Murray, I believe, in like a
Lake
couple
Murray.
weeks. That should be a fun
This
one.
will probably play. Kermit will probably play.
I I hope you have a great tournament at Lake Murray, as I almost said Murray. Like, I hope it goes well for you, and safe
Thank
travels,
you.
and congrats on all the other life adventures you're about to undertake. So yeah,
Congratulations to you too. That's awesome.
yeah.
I
Thanks, man.
appreciate you having me on here.
Yeah, of course, and we'll chat soon.
Okay.
All
Talk
right,
to you later. See ya.
yep. All right, everyone. Well, I hope you enjoyed this week's episode on the Lure Lab. We're talking frog fishing with Hunter Shryock. As I said his name wrong this time, but as always, if you're on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button, drop a comment down below of what your favorite frog is or your setup. If you're on MP3 like Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please leave a review. It helps this podcast be shown and for more people to see it who are looking up bass fishing podcasts. And we greatly appreciate it. And stay tuned for next week's episode.